And a man who knows what it's like to call those big events is joining us here in studio. One of my good friends on planet Earth. Thrilled I can call him that after now. It's just finished 14th season as the voice of just Sunday Night Football alone. One of the all-time greats, Al Michaels. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. Welcome home.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate
You're
that.
back from Miami. I'm here from Brentwood.
How was the trip?
Easy trip. It's pretty good. I come in here, and then you lose power. The whole building goes down.
That's right.
I show up, and there's an earthquake or a power hit.
I don't
the
know.
night the lights went out in El Segundo.
That's right.
But we're back on right now.
We are back on.
Good.
We're back on TV, radio, and all that good stuff. What'd you think of the game last night, Al? What'd you think?
The game, I thought it would be higher scoring early on. I knew it would be a close, competitive game. You know, I felt going in that that pass rush of the 49ers could make the difference, and I think it did early on. Toward the end, of course, we all know what happened. Mahomes got hot. The 49ers couldn't get to him. You know what's interesting? I've been listening, of course, over the past, 16 hours or whatever it's been to what everybody's talking about, and clearly the 3rd and 15 is gigantic. The pass to Tyreek Hill, the Mahomes comeback, et cetera, some of the 49er strategic decisions. But you know what I kept thinking back to?
What's that?
Mahomes in October in Denver. The quarterback sneak. People forget about that. But it looks like Kansas City's season is over.
No doubt.
He's on the bottom of the pile. And, it's funny because we had them. I got to read you my notes from the game we did with them in Chicago. And I talked to Mahomes. I said, tell me what you felt like, for the next 10 seconds or so. He said, I knew I had a first down. I felt something hit my leg, could not move my leg, didn't know what was wrong. Kneecap was on the side of my leg. So all the worst thoughts, can't move, season's over. Doctor came out, popped my knee back in. 2 steps, I felt fine. I thought I was going back in the game. Doc said, I'm good, but you're not going back in the game. So you think about that and how close their season came to ending. And you know who should get a little shout out right now is Matt Moore.
Oh, yeah.
Because Matt Moore, who had not played last year, and I think was coaching his kids in high school football or junior football, some sort of kids football out here in Southern California. He comes in. Andy Reid got him to come back. He finished that game in Denver. They won the game.
Right.
The next week we had him against Green Bay. That was our Sunday night. That was going to be the number 1 game we had all year, Mahomes against Rodgers. Turned out to be Moore against Rodgers. But Moore played very well that night. Then he won the next game, I think, against Minnesota. They had a bye week. Mahomes came back. But, that win that they had against Minnesota was so critical. And the victory that he was able to sustain against the Denver Broncos put them in a position to get that bye.
No doubt.
And so you keep forgetting about all the little things that happened in the beginning of the year. And then Mahomes comes back, and it's it's an amazing thing. I mean, the doctor comes out, pops your kneecap back in. I mean, just when he was telling us the story, and we're cringing because it sounds so insidious in a way, and yet here he was at the end of the year, and you don't even think about that anymore because he's playing. I mean, he played at the fourth quarter, obviously, at the highest level.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly thought the Saints were going to make the Super Bowl this year, and one of the reasons why, if they had, would have been Bridgewater going 5-0. Moore almost went 3-0 with Mahomes out after that knee being on its side, and he's now got a Super Bowl ring. He was coaching high school. He was at Kyler Murray's pro day, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, he was.
I mean, just observing, and man, I love stories like this. I love stories like this. People who are persevering and more. We all know obviously about Damian Williams being back in Miami. That's where Moore was a quarterback when Tannehill went down, and he played in a playoff game against the Steelers and got blown up. I mean, I just love stories like that.
Oh, yeah, they're the best. I mean, especially, a backup quarterback coming in. And, and Moore said to us when we did that Green Bay game that it was all about Andy Reid. Andy called him. He wanted to go and play for Andy. And, so we all know that, so the football community loves Andy Reid.
My gosh.
There's a lot to love there, too. I mean, He's a wonderful man. He's coached for 21 straight years. You and I both know he's had heartache on the field and off the field. He's always been the same man. The funny thing about him is because, we covered him for a ton of years in Philadelphia. And I thought of all the coaches that I saw who lasted a long time, he was the one guy I thought really needed a year off. And I even said it on the air at one point, and then I talked to him, when he took the Kansas City job, and I said, "Did you think about taking a year off?" He said, "Absolutely not." And Kansas City got, right on the phone after he was let go by the Philadelphia Eagles. He's a coach. He's a wonderful man. I'm so happy for him and for the family. And so Tammy was on the stand yesterday along with him, and she's been his rock through all of these years. And it's great. It's just so good because, I remember when I did the Super Bowl with John Madden back in '05 when Pittsburgh met Seattle in Detroit.
Yep.
And I think John at the top of the show said about Bill Cowher, he said, this is the but. Bill Cowher is a great coach, but. So Andy finally got rid of the but, and there's no question that someday he will be making a speech in Canton.
I agree with you. Al Michaels here on the Rich Eisen Show, and another reason why, because we were talking about it with Mooch, who goes way back with Andy Reid to the Green Bay days, is he's got 220 some odd career wins, and he's got a quarterback who just became the first human to win a league MVP and a Super Bowl and not yet be 25. I mean, and Andy's a young man in his early 60s. He wants to keep coaching 10 more years. You could just do the math. With Mahomes staying healthy, knock on wood, I mean, you could be talking about another 100 wins for him regular season, and who knows, playoffs. Obviously, we have to see it, but you could envision it right now, wouldn't you say?
There's no question. I mean, I think, yes, I mean, they could go rolling down this next decade and win it 3 or 4 times at this particular point. But then again, look, you never know when a kneecap gets dislocated and you can't put it back in. So you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the injuries, of course, are so gigantic. You look at Tom Brady's career; he only had that one injury that made the knee on opening day back in 2008. They still won 11 games, I think, that year, but mathematics took them out of the playoffs. So, that's the dynasty we think about. We think about the 49ers back in the 80s and 90s. You had Montana, and you had Young, and you had Walsh. And, Seifert inherited that team and won a couple of Super Bowls as well. Yeah, I mean, when you look at Kansas City and the way that organization is structured, I mean, they're very, very solid. The Hunt family we know about obviously from the beginning of time, Lamar founding the franchise and the American Football League, Clark taking over right now. Brett Veach, I know you'll have on the show later, has done a great job internally. They're set up the right way. They've got a great thing going right now, and they've got a lot of stars. And this is a team that last year, I mean, they were able to sustain the loss of a guy who led the league in rushing the year before. People forget about that too. Kareem Hunt goes out. So, and then Tyreek Hill had his issues and all of that. So it wasn't all, candy and candies and flowers there, but they were able to get through everything. And that, I think, is really what Andy Reid is great at. He's really good at assessing every situation, getting it right, and away they go.
Al Michaels here on the Rich Eisen Show. It does help, though, to have a kid who can be as dynamic as Mahomes is, who can, as you just read off your phone there, tell you that story about his kneecap being on the side of his leg, and 3 weeks later be back in under center. And Andy Reid, that bye week was 2 weeks after they put him back in the game, after a game in Mexico where everything looked great. A year ago, we all know there was some issue with the turf, and that's why everyone's saying, just keep him out for 2 weeks. But he is just so unconventionally good that it overcomes what you normally would say conventionally would be wise to do. Where does Mahomes rank for you in quarterbacks that you have seen suit up, Al, over the years here?
He's only been a starter for
2 years?
Yeah, 2 years. He's won an MVP award. I mean, right now, and, when you want to put the numbers to it and the analytics and all of the rest, and I don't think anybody's really had a beginning of a career like he has.
I think the only one you could say is Marino, right?
Right.
That Marino made it so young, and he did have a coach that we knew had Hall of Fame credentials, and we thought he's going to keep going, and he never made it back.
No.
But
got to one Super Bowl.
Right.
Second year, lost to Montana.
That's the only thing you could think of that might be maybe in terms of the beginning of a career. I don't know, but I leave it to you.
And the thing about him, and everybody knows this now too, because you watch the way he handles himself, you watch the interviews that he does. That's him. He's a great He's a great young kid. He really is a young kid, young guy. Gets it. I know a lot has been said about the fact that he kind of grew up in a professional sports clubhouse. That Pat was a 10-year pitcher in the major leagues, mainly with Minnesota. But Patrick was used to showing up in those types of environments. He gets it though. He's such a likable guy that you root for him. You root for an Andy Reid, and I looked at that game yesterday, and those are two teams that I think have a lot of likable people, two organizations that have a lot of respect. So it was one of those things where I didn't see a villain in the game. Sometimes there's a villain in a Super Bowl. That wasn't the case yesterday.
Well, in terms of the 49ers, too, which, I guess we should turn our attention to, they were up by 10 with 6 and 14 to go, technically, although, as we know, the Chiefs were knocking on the door and scored a second later to start this comeback. Good people there, too. John Lynch is as good as they come. Obviously, Kyle Shanahan. You know the way this business works, Al. I don't need to tell you. I mean, we're already going to start here. Well, 28-3 in Atlanta. Now you got that 20-10 lead fourth quarter here. What do you think?
Everybody needs a narrative, right? It's like, look, we live in a world right now. We have to fill a gazillion hours of airtime. Newspapers have to fill a lot of newsprint. The internet, God knows. I mean, we're all over the place. So everybody needs something. And so now it's like, okay, this is the monkey on his back. But look, Kyle's a heck of a coach. He's 40 years old. I think he's going to have a great run. I've known his dad since he was coaching here in Los Angeles with the Raiders back in 88, 89. And I remember going out to a practice one day, and there's an 8-year-old kid running around, and it's Kyle. So we go back a long way. I know. Sometimes you just have to live with those things, but I think of him as a guy right now that took a team along with John Lynch, built a pretty good team, built a really good football team, and they've got a lot of great parts there too. I think before it's all said and done, that he'll win his Super Bowl. He may win a couple like his dad did. They're set up to be very, very good down the line. But I mean, the great thing about football and the great thing about sports that we love, I mean, you think about the 49ers. They were 18 inches away from going on the road and having to win 3 games.
Well, you called that
to
game
get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Instead, Greenlaw makes the tackle at the half-yard line. They get a bye week, 2 home games. That's how close we come to. Hey, the whole narrative is different. So right now, that's going to be part of it, and sooner or later, you hope to extricate yourself, and I think they will.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what you just referred to in Game 256, an incredible end to the NFL 100 playing season, regular season, is that had that 1 inch been on the other side of the goal line, then Green Bay would have had home field throughout.
Right.
The Saints would have had that second bye week.
Correct.
The Seahawks would have been home for a 3 seed against the Vikings. And the
49ers, they would have gone to Philadelphia.
They got to Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, and then probably Green Bay, and then wherever.
And then who the heck knows? I mean, they could have still been in the Super Bowl. But,
sure.
But the Saints definitely wouldn't have had their hands full with the Minnesota Vikings the very next week.
Right.
They wouldn't have been just the third team to have won as many games they did in the regular season and not had a bye in the current playoff format. I mean, it really is.
So why do we love sports,
amazing.
Right?
I know. And the 49ers, again, a 4-win team one year. They got a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter the next year of a Super Bowl. You never know.
Legenov gets checked by Ramsey. McClanahan is there. The puck is still loose. 11 seconds. You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow up to Schultz. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
I get goosebumps and chills and want to
Every single time.
I just want to start crying every single time I hear that. Al Michaels, another segment with us live on the Rich Eisen Show right here. 40 years ago, coming up on February 22nd, this month, Al.
And let's get a plug in for Mike Eruzione, who just wrote a book. I just got it yesterday, recounting his life and his career and what happened. And I talked to Mike a lot. We're going to go. The whole team has been invited to Las Vegas on that day, February 22nd, and the Knights, the Golden Knights, hockey, the NHL team.
Yep.
They have a game that night, and they want to honor the team, so they're bringing everybody in, and I'm kind of like the mascot of the team. So, no, I'll be in there too, and I talked to Mike a lot. That's really going to be a lot of fun. But I mean, to think that it's 40 years is crazy, Rich. Totally.
Yeah, because I what do you think of when you hear that? You saw the reaction of all three of us here. Like we literally sat up in our chairs and I get emotional. What is your reaction when you hear it?
It's odd. Look, I've heard it thousands of times back, and thank God some of the right words came out. God knows what I might have said, and so. But it's very funny. I heard it so much, and obviously I know what's happening when the tape starts to roll. It's almost in a way I'm looking at that or hearing that in the third person. It's like I know it's me, obviously, but I think of it as like I'm hearing it and somebody else is doing it because I want to enjoy the moment the way America enjoyed the moment. Mm-hmm. So I take myself out of my body, put myself in the third person. I know what's coming. I know. The great thing is I know what it means to so many people. What happened at that particular time. A lot of people obviously did not live through it. I mean, you have to be at least 45, 48 years old to remember it.
Yep.
And then you'd be a child. But one of the great things too is that movie Miracle. That was terrific. And even though there's some literary license taken in that movie. It's not a documentary. I mean, HBO did a fantastic documentary that came out back in 2000. That was the real deal story, right to the nth degree. But the movie captured the essence of what took place. And I mean, even to this day, I talk to a lot of, kids coaches who will play the movie the night before the game. And it will inspire the kids. It put the story in perspective. And even to this day, it's Chris Collinsworth, but I can't.
Is that really Collinsworth calling right now?
I can't take the call right now on Rich Eisen's show, Chris. I'll call you right back. Aloha. Sorry, I brought this out here to read the Mahomes notes.
Do you believe in Collinsworth?
Collinsworth. Yes. So sorry. Anyway,
that's what we call a priceless moment.
That is a priceless moment.
Fantastic.
But anyway, the whole story is so good. And I've said this many times, and you and I have talked about it. There are so many things you remember where you were, and none of them are very good. I mean, most recently, Kobe. Right. A lot of people will always remember when they heard that. 9/11, the Challenger goes, I mean, all of these horrible things. People remember where they were if you're of a certain age. And they smile, and it's an exultant moment instead of a depressing moment. And it's still, it's wonderful to talk about it. People say, do you ever get tired of people talking to you about it? No, are you kidding me? It's great. People love it. And here we go 40 years later, Rich. Crazy.
And we talk about coaching all the time. Obviously, Andy Reid today, that 21-year-long slog for him to finally reach that mountaintop. Right. And two more coaches getting in the hall, and Cowher and Jimmy Johnson. What was Herb Brooks like? Because he, unfortunately, will not be in Vegas with you and the rest of the team on February 22nd to celebrate the 40th anniversary. What was Herb Brooks really like?
Well, Herb died in a car accident, I guess, 12 or 15 years ago. He was through and through a hockey coach is what he was. And, I mean, just to think about what he did after the Olympics. He coaches his team. They pull off what Sports Illustrated ranked as the greatest sports moment of the 20th century, at least in terms of United States sports. What did he do? I mean, here's a guy who could have gone around the country, been honored and celebrated in parades, you name it. He could have been the king of America. 2 weeks later, what is he doing? He's in Davos, Switzerland, coaching a Swiss club team. Because Herb Brooks was a hockey coach. And when we were all gathered at Madison Square Garden, and Sports Illustrated, in conjunction with CBS, put on at the end of the century affair at Madison Square Garden, and they ranked it as the top moment of the 20th century, the sports. And Herb and they had me introduce the team, and we were walking down off the stage, down a little staircase, and I'm walking next to Herb, and he said, how could they vote that the number one moment? And I said, Herb, how could they not vote it the number one moment? Would you stop it? So it was whatever took place around it. I'm not saying he wasn't interested in it, but it was moving on. He got that team in a position where they were able to pull off what they did. Mike details it in great measure in his book, Aruzzioni's book. But I liked him a lot. And he kept, at a time 40 years ago, he kept the press at bay. And the only reason that I had access to him was my partner was Ken Dryden, who had just retired as the goalie for the Montreal Canadiens, Hall of Famer, one of the greatest goalies of all time. And Herb had a great respect and admiration for Kenny. Mm-hmm. So on every off night, which was every other night, Herb would come over to our hotel, we'd have a beer, and I had tremendous access to him because of Ken Dryden. And part of it, too, was he was picking Ken's brain as well, because he knew that Ken was so smart, understood every aspect of hockey. So he was a guy he was a taskmaster. And remember, don't forget, when they won, he disappeared. He went in the back, and the movie has him, crying. He might have been doing that in the hall, but he wanted it was their moment. It was the team's moment, and he didn't want to have any. I don't want to say he didn't want to have any part of it, mm-hmm. but it was just not. It was not his deal to be out there and to be celebrated and to be honored and all of the rest. He was a hockey coach.
Hal Michaels here on the Rich Eisen Show. We asked you before, because the play from last night's game was from the 1948 Rose Bowl. I asked you if you recalled a Rose Bowl, and you said you did it on the radio. Right?
I did.
Which Rose Bowl was that?
Well, it was 1976. It was the Ohio State UCLA game.
Right.
Dick Vermeil upsets Woody Hayes.
Right.
And Wally Henry scores a touchdown, maybe. I can't remember some of the other things.
2 touchdowns he scored.
He had 2.
As Chris is saying over there.
Sorry.
23-10.
Right.
Ohio State was undefeated and ranked number 1.
Right.
And got taken out by UCLA.
I'm telling you, Vermeil deserves to be in the Hall. I mean, we so many deserving people to be in the Hall, but I mean, Dick Vermeil has been everywhere in football. I mean, you want to talk about guy, and because it was just a couple years later, he's in the Super Bowl coaching the Philadelphia Eagles,
right,
against another guy who should be in the Hall, and Tom Flores, right? I mean, there's so many different ways to Sunday that we can do this sort of thing. So back then, you're doing radio for Rose Bowl, and then doing some.
Well, I was doing the San Francisco Giants,
right?
And the radio rights were owned by Golden West Broadcasters, which included the station I work for in San Francisco, KSFO, and KMPC down here.
Right.
So I wound up being asked to do the game on local radio because Fred Hessler was their local announcer, and he was going to do it on national radio. I think Kurt Gowdy actually did the game on television.
Right.
And so I come down there. It was a one-off for me. But it was a great game.
And were you doing Wide World of Sports at the time? Or
no, I had that was the year before I left to go to ABC full time. So it was. I think what I did is that year, that Monday Night Baseball started at ABC, and I was hired to do the B game.
Yeah. With
Norm Cash and Bob Gibson. So I did that year. I did the San Francisco Giants.
Right.
6 days a week, and Monday Night Football on the 7th day.
So now the Monday Night Baseball A team was Keith Jackson and Howard Cosell. Was that the Monday Night Baseball
That was in '77. Keith, Howard, Euchre was there too. I had 76. 76 was Bob Prince, who lasted less than a year. Was Warner Wolf on that? I can't remember. No, it was Bob Prince. It was Bob Euchre.
That's great.
Might have been, yeah. Then I got Warner in the playoffs that year. It was like crazy. Let's go to the videotape and the whole thing.
Give me your best Euchre story. You must have a million.
Oh,
of them.
Course I do. So the best Euchre story, and there are 4,000. So Euchre and Cosell and I are doing a game in, I think it was Houston.
Okay.
And Howard, you know the way Howard was. He was, baseball's such a simple game. They make it so complicated. So it's a situation late in the game where Howard is calling for a bunt. Now, when somebody calls for a bunt in a situation where you can't bunt, they know nothing about baseball. So Euchre and I, now Howard would be spewing all of this misinformation. And now Euchre's trying to, explain to Howard carefully, why you probably wouldn't bunt in this situation. So it's a little bit, he's chiding him minimally. And Cosell says on the air, he says, "Okay, Yuki, you don't have to be so truculent. You do know what truculent means, don't you?" And without hesitating, Euchre says, "Of course, Howard. If you had a truck and I borrowed it, it would be a truculent." And that is Bob Euchre.
Without skipping a beat?
Without skipping a beat. And the other thing with Euchre is we're doing a game. It's just the two of us are doing a game later that season. And Charlie Finley owns the A's, and he wants to introduce the alert orange baseballs, like the tennis balls. Sure. You can see them. So we start talking about it. The game is terrible, and we're going back and forth. And then Yuki finally says, "Look, the bottom line is this could never happen." I go, "Why not?" He said, "You couldn't find enough diseased horses." So I mean, how does a brain work like that?
I don't know why it showed up in my Twitter timeline the other day, but the Miller Lite commercial where he was Mr. Baseball, I must be in the front row.
Right.
Like as they tell him he's got to move, and then they cut to him 3 rows from the top of the stadium, screaming he missed the tag. It made me laugh as much 2 days ago as it did 40 years
Rich,
ago.
there were two guys, almost everything that came out of their mouths was hysterical. Euchre and Don Rickles. And I knew both of them very well. And I mean, I miss Don so much. And Yuki's still the same. I'll see Yuki once in a while. We'll go down for a football game in Arizona, and he's down there in the off season.
Yeah.
And he's got an amazing brain. He really does.
Where did you meet Rickles? When did you first come
Oh,
across
God, I met
Don
Rickles. So I loved Don Rickles. I saw him when I was 18 years old, and he brought me up on stage, and I played an Indian chief.
Come on.
Oh, yeah. When he was working in Vegas, and he was working a lounge. And then years later, I got to meet him, and he was at a party, and I saw him, and I idolized him. I loved him. And he sees me from across the room, and I think it's a case of mistaken identity. And he comes up to me, and he goes, "I love you." I said, "What?" He said, "No, I love you." I said, "Hey, Don, I'm not sure he knows it's me. I don't know what he thinks." But I go, "Don, you might love me, but I love you 10 times more than you can ever love me." So then we're back and forth, and he says, "Hey, listen," he says, "the next time you're out here, you think we can have dinner?" He assumes I live in New York. I said, "Don, I live in Brentwood." I said, "Can we have dinner like every other night for the rest of our lives?" I said, "Where do you live?" He goes, "I live in Spain. I just came in for the party." Right? So I mean, everything. And then Don and Barbara and my wife Linda and I, and we'd have dinner with them a lot, and I miss him so much.
Because he was a big sports fan? He was
huge. He used to go home at night and watch the Dodger replay until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Really?
Don's whole life was basically working the Vegas and working shows and being up all night.
Right.
So he would go home on a night when he'd be, home at midnight.
Right.
He would tell me he would lie in bed and watch the Dodger replay till 4 in the morning. Now, he loves sports. He loves sports.
he was tight with Lasorda, right?
He was very tight with Lasorda.
Right.
And of course, the Frank Sinatra stories are classic. And then one night, I remember, so I was playing golf with Doc Rivers, who was my broadcast partner back in the early 2000s. And I told Doc I was having dinner with Don Rickles, and Doc said, "Oh, I love Don. Someday maybe I'd like to go to dinner." So I went home and I called Don. I said, "Hey," Don was a big sports fan. Would you mind if I invited Doc Rivers to dinner? Oh, that's great. So we show up. We're at Mr. Chow's. It's Lyndon, me, and Barbara and Don. And Doc's a little bit late. Doc walks up to the table. And I go, "Don," I said, "this is Doc Rivers." And Don doesn't even look at me. He looks at me and he goes, "Who invited him?" And asked Doc about the next time for 3 hours. I mean, it's just, you ache. Your stomach just aches when you leave because you're just laughing so hard all night.
Is there, Al Michaels, a few more minutes left with you here on the show. I've never asked you this on air or off the air. I'll ask you here. Is there anything you want to call that if you had a choice, you know what, I've never called this event, but I would do it? What would that be?
Rich, there is nothing, because I've been blessed, Super Bowl and World Series and NBA Finals and, hosted the Stanley Cup Finals and the Olympics and Hagler, Hearns, and it's crazy. So somebody said to me once, "What about the World Cup soccer?"
Yeah.
And I said, Well, I've never been to a soccer game, so I don't think I'm going to start by announcing the World Cup. I mean, that's not going to happen.
You've never been to a soccer game?
I've never been to a soccer game. I've been to when my son was playing soccer when he was 10 years old.
No, sure.
I went to
Youth
his
soccer.
No, but
Right.
I've never been to a soccer game. I haven't. So what else? I mean, look, I'm the guy who's done motorcycles on ice in Germany, right?
What?
There was an event on Wide World of Sports. It was a staple for years. We'd go over to Innsel, West Germany, a little town in the Bavarian Alps between Munich and Salzburg, Austria. And these guys would ride motorcycles with spikes protruding on a speed skating rink, a quarter mile.
Yeah.
And it was all Eastern Europeans, all Czechoslovakians and the Soviets and the Poles. And, and that was one of my first ever assignments at Wide World of Sports.
How do you call something like that? And they're coming around the end?
Yeah,
or
you know, you're making it up. Well, I mean, who knows who anybody is, right? But it was just the wildness of it. See, that's what Wide World of Sports was. It brought you to places you couldn't go, and it seems so ridiculous right now. But remember, that was the days of satellite television.
Yeah.
So Wide World would take you to places you'd never been before. Boxing in Moscow, boxing in Cuba. I was in Cuba in 1983 calling the U.S. against the Cubans in amateur boxing. And every other year, Fidel Castro would show up, and you had to be ready to interview him. He did not show up the year that I did it.
Right.
But you would be able to go to places that you couldn't get to. And certainly on television, that was the advent of satellite technology. So Wide World took you truly around the world.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the movie Ford versus Ferrari. I don't know if you saw that, but that was...
I met the writer the other night. That's so funny.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but I knew Carol Shelby. I've got to see that movie. I have to.
It really is very well done, and there's a lot of, ABC Sports was there, and
Sure.
I'm sure there's probably a great Rune Arledge story behind that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what would he think of today's television industry, do you think?
He would have evolved. I mean, Rune was a master. He figured Rune was, remember, he's the guy that created Up Close and Personal. And Rune's theory was, and he hired me at ABC, and he was my boss for 10 years, and then he went to News Only. His feeling was, look, games, there's a similarity to the games, but what makes each game distinct are the people and the personalities. So especially in the Olympics, what he was able to do was make gymnastics and figure skating and some of the other sports that are not secondary sports, but not baseball and football and basketball, make them more relevant. I mean, he really created this whole gymnastics genre because he had Nadia Comaneci, Olga Korbut, and all of those people from that era, and he made them people. You understood their backstories. And that was what it was all about in those years. It was, who are these people, and why should I be interested in them, and who do I root for? Who do I root against? And so, look, we all who grew up under Rune, in a way, learned a lot from Rune Arledge. And, I mean, to this day, a lot of what he put in place is still around.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, Olympics, and you're calling 10 Super Bowls as you have, and Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football. I mean, those are the premium events you want to call as a broadcaster, and they still are. Right now, in television.
No, he was. Look, I mean, he was one of the iconic figures, not only in television, but I mean, just the way it went beyond television. Because, like I say, he's the guy that kind of brought you to places you couldn't go before.
Right.
I mean, it sounds so ridiculous right now when you can get on a phone right here and talk to somebody
like Collinsworth,
like Collinsworth in Bulgaria. Right? But in those years, it was so different.
You're the man, Al. You're the man. And so, Super Bowl 2 years right up the road here, right? That's you at the mic, correct, for that one?
Probably, walk home, I think.
That's
With the traffic, I might have to.
Well, you might be able to hit Toscana during halftime and be back for the third quarter.
Of course.
You never know.
They're long enough, the intermissions.
Oh, man. Love you, Al. Love you. Right back at you.
Anytime, man.
Thank
Anytime.
you. That's Al Michaels right here on The Rich Eisen Show.